Arwad Chaudhry. I am a policy specialist at the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, and it's a pleasure for me to introduce today's session. Our webinar is co-organized by the UNDP Seoul Policy Center and the Korea Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it's our second event on the theme of Green New Deal and the third event under our Build Back Better series. As we continue to face the unprecedented challenges of COVID-19 pandemic, the objective of today's webinar is to discuss the ambitious and timely moves towards a green recovery that certain actors have taken, including the Republic of Korea, Rwanda, and the European Union. Before we proceed, I would like to invite all participants to please enter in the chat room your name, if you wish, your current city and country. We already have many people connecting from around the world and would love to know where you are located. This will give us a sense of the participants and reinforce our feeling of global solidarity. So our webinar today will last for about 1 hour and a half. This is quite a short time for such an interesting and relevant issue. We realize that. But the idea of the webinar is to stimulate a discussion today, which can be followed up in other formats. Given the limited time we have, please note that we will be taking questions from the audience through the chat room only. Therefore, feel free to start asking your questions on the chat box. To go back to my earlier point, if you haven't done so already, please, you can start your questions by stating your name and your current location in the chat room. So let's now move on to the opening session. We are honored to have the former United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, delivering congratulatory remarks through this recorded video. So let's play the video.
Honorable Minister Jeanne d'Arc Musawa Maria of Environment of Rwanda, distinguished representative of the European Commission, Ms. Adriana Dinu, Deputy Assistant Administrator of UNDP, Ms. Sandrine Dixon-DeCleve, Co-President of the Club of Rome, Mr. Yoo-yeon Chul, Ambassador and Deputy Minister for Climate Change of Korea, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. At a time when countries around the world are actively seeking to put an end to COVID-19, I find it highly timely and relevant that experts are having an in-depth discussion under the theme of Building Back Better. In this sense, it is my great honor and privilege to be part of this meaningful meeting. The whole world will remember 2020 as a year struck by floods, wildfires, and the pandemic. Indeed, we could say that humanity's resilience has been under test. In particular, the COVID-19 pandemic has fundamentally changed every aspect of our lives. Experts say that ecological destruction by humans and the climate crisis caused by greenhouse gas emissions are the underlying causes of the new infectious disease like COVID-19. All this reminds me of what His Holiness Pope Francis said to me in 2018. I quote, "God always forgives, human beings sometimes forgive, but nature never forgives," unquote. Nature is sending a clear signal to humans, and we must heed nature's warnings with determination and action. Before we cross the climate tipping point, we must work to build back better by improving fundamentals of our socio-economic structure. Ladies and gentlemen, today, countries around the world are taking green initiatives to overcome the climate crisis and inequality. For instance, Korea, Japan, and the European Union declared their 2050 net zero targets. China also announced to become carbon neutral by 2060. US President-elect Joe Biden also pledged to rejoin the Paris Climate Change Agreement and to announce the 2050 net zero target. To give you more details of Korea's efforts to build back better and greener, last July, the Korean government announced the Green New Deal Master Plan. In addition, at the National Assembly of Korea, a bill for the transition to a carbon-neutral society was proposed last month, laying the legal foundation for the net zero target for 2050. Given that there are only 6 countries with legally binding net zero targets for 2050, I consider this motion a great progress. As above mentioned, countries joining in the declaration of 2050 net zero targets clearly indicates a wind of change. Moreover, the return of the United States to the Paris Climate Change Agreement is expected to propel global climate action. It is heartening that year 2021 is off to a good start. Now, we must ensure that more countries take part in climate action based on strong partnership and aim to create positive ripple effects. In this context, today's meeting is meaningful as it will not only provide important lessons, but also enhance solidarity for green transition. Ladies and gentlemen, for a successful green transition, I'd like to stress the following 3 points. First, we have to set a clear vision and objective to ensure that the Green New Deal serves as not a mere economic stimulus, but a socio-economic transformation towards building a carbon-neutral society. It has to make sure that the Green New Deal serves as a just and inclusive transition where no one is left behind. To that end, the Green New Deal has to be interlinked with the Sustainable Development Goals, a pledge that encompasses economic growth, environmental protection, as well as social integration. Second, so far, about 110 countries have considered to declare net zero targets. Now, it is time to set bolder targets and devise concrete policies for climate action, such as the ambitiously updated Nationally Determined Contributions, NDCs. Third, I'd like to emphasize the importance of environmental education for our future generations. Italy is a good example that has already mandated its public schools to provide environmental education. For sustainable development, an individual's thoughts and actions should be changed first in order to bring about constructive change in the societies as a whole. Children should learn to appreciate how important it is to cherish and live in harmony with our Mother Nature. There is no better way to stop climate change than to educate our children of the environmental value, as they will be the future leaders. Distinguished guests, next year will mark a monumental milestone. We have a series of global events to be held in 2021, including the Global Center on Adaptation Climate Adaptation Summit, in Amsterdam, P4G Summit in Seoul, and COP26 in Glasgow, all of which are expected to be an impetus to turning our commitment into specific climate action. Looking forward to everyone at this meeting sharing insights for sustainable development of the present and the future. I hope today's discussion greatly contributes to a new leap forward in global climate action. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, for starting this webinar with such an inspiring message. I would now like to invite Dr. Stefan Klingebiel, Director of the Seoul Policy Center, for his welcome remarks.
Thank you, Sarwat. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and colleagues and friends, I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar. As the Director of the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, I'm excited to co-host this event with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. We are grateful for this collaboration. We have just heard the inspiring video remarks from the former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. His 3 points are really a great action plan we should follow up. We all know that we are experiencing a very difficult time. The pandemic is affecting the life of all people in the world. We know that the socioeconomic recovery from this pandemic is not easy. We have multiple challenges. People who were already disadvantaged before COVID-19 are suffering much more than those who are better off. All countries in the world and many international organizations are setting up plans how to mitigate the consequences of the pandemic. This is true for both developing countries and developed countries. We know already that huge amounts of money are and will be invested in recovery programs. And we know that quite often the environmental implications of those investments are not the guiding principle. Humanity is waging war on nature. This is a quote from a remarkable speech of the current UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, which he gave a couple of days ago at Columbia University. I think he's absolutely right. If we agree on this crucial question, we need to ask ourselves, what can we do about it? The concrete follow-up needs to include policy decisions and the implementation of policies, which are different from the past, from unsustainable policies. This is why we need to look for examples, to some extent even role models or early movers who might indicate how to do it. In total, we have around 18 countries in the world, plus the European Union, with the ambition to break with unsustainable growth patterns through the implementation of different types of Green New Deal plans. Today, we want to learn from first experiences from 3 innovative actors: Rwanda, the European Union, and the Republic of Korea. What might serve as a guiding question for our today's discussion is, we all understand that the commitment for a Green New Deal is a complex task, but how can we bring about such a decision? We understand that we have competing interests in all countries in the world. We have trade-offs between short and long-term goals, and we have heterogeneous actors. I think it is fascinating to learn from our discussion today how this kind of new Green Deal consensus might be reached, how the political economy constraints could be overcome. For this purpose, we have a number of great speakers tonight or today, depending on where you are. This is why I would like now to invite Ambassador Yo from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea to share with us your remarks. Over to you, Ambassador Yo.
Thank you. His Excellency Ban Ki-moon and Dr. Stefan Klingebiel, Director of UNDP Seoul Policy Center, and Dr. Muzawa Maria, Minister of Environment of Rwanda, and Ms. Sandrine Dixon de Cleve, Co-President of the Club of Rome, and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, please Allow me to begin by expressing my gratitude to the UNDP Seoul Policy Center for co-organizing this meaningful event with the Foreign Ministry. I would also like to offer my special thanks to all those who are joining us online from different locations around the globe, despite the time differences, and I wish everyone strength and health. As the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic continue, we have seen a glimpse of hope with the news of vaccines. We should note, however, that this fight against COVID-19 may just be a prelude to what we may face with the climate crisis. The trouble is there are neither personal protective equipment nor vaccines for the climate change. It is true that the international community has worked for decades against climate change, but we used to believe that there would be more time for us to prepare. However, we are experiencing the cruel realities of climate change more frequently than ever before. Natural disasters and climate abnormalities such as typhoons, floods, and wildfire, not to mention the ice melting in the Arctic, have all become new normals. And it makes us worry that the climate crisis might be really just around the corner. I believe this is the reason why the so-called green issues have become a high priority globally and political agenda domestically. Our strong commitment to tackle climate change was reinforced when President Moon Jae-in of Korea announced our aim for carbon neutrality by 2050 last October. The Korean government is taking initial steps with the implementation of the Green New Deal to align our recovery policy measures with long-term climate ambition. With an investment of 62 billion US dollars in the Green New Deal for the next 5 years, the Korean government is working on accelerating the low carbon and green transition of its economy as we pursue carbon neutrality. Korea's Green New Deal and 2050 carbon neutrality goal have many different implications. First, it shows that Korea is committed to implementing the Paris Agreement faithfully. This is in line with our plans to submit our LEDS targets this year. Second, it indicates that Korea is also trying to be as ambitious as possible as we join the global efforts to address climate change. Third, we are aligning our short-term economic recovery package titled the Green New Deal with our long-term target for 2050. This will allow us to be more coherent in designing our policies and implementing them. Finally, this will send a very clear message to the market. Korean businesses will now understand we are not just trying to go green to recovery from COVID-19, but we are going green towards 2050 and beyond. This is a strong message that already translated into change. However, the challenges posed by climate change have no respect for boundaries, and the sustainability of our planet cannot be assured by efforts of a single country. For this reason, the combined efforts and approach of the international community are critical. As a host of the P4G Seoul Summit to be held in May 2021, Korea hopes to bring together the solidarity and commitment of the participating leaders on greening our recovery packages, while aligning them with ambitious long-term climate goals. The summit will also be an opportunity for us to share innovative and cutting-edge solutions, build on creative ideas, and engage with the future generation so that we may together deliver transformative impact. I sincerely hope that this audience will also be keen to support and take part in the summit process. Once again, let me thank the UNDP Seoul Policy Center for providing a timely opportunity to share our experiences to build back better and greener from the COVID-19 pandemic. As Korea reaffirms its commitment to the Paris Agreement, and continue to seek for a higher ambition. I look forward to closely working with you on creative and innovative ideas that will contribute to our efforts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador Yu, for your remarks. It's really a pleasure to have you with us today. So after Ambassador's remarks, we now move on to our panel discussion. And our distinguished panelists include Ms. Adriana Dinu, Deputy Assistant Administrator and Deputy Director for the Bureau for Policy and Program Support at UNDP. We will then hear from Honorable Minister Jean-Dirk Muzamaria, and then we will be listening to Mr. Maxwell Gomera from also UNDP resident representative in Rwanda. And Minister Jean-Dirk Muzamaria is the Minister for Environment at the government of Rwanda. So after the Rwanda session, we will have Ms. Sandrine Dixon-Declève, co-president for the Club of Rome. And lastly, we have Dr. Tae Yong-jung, Professor of Sustainable Development at Yonsei University. One of our designated speakers, Dr. Imer Scholz, Deputy Director at German Development Institute, is feeling unwell and sends her regrets, and we wish her all the best. So now we will move on to our panel session. Our first speaker, Adriana Dinu. Please, Adriana, the floor is yours. And Adriana is joining us bright and early from New York. Over to you, Adriana.
Thank you so much, Sarawat. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Distinguished panel members, audience, thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to focus my talk on 5 key messages. The first one is related to the interconnectedness of the pandemic. COVID-19 has unleashed an unprecedented crisis, with global human development on course to decline this year for the first time in a generation. Up to 115 million people might be pushed into extreme poverty in 2020. And as we know, half of the world population lacks healthcare and social protection. A UNDP recent study that we launched last week shows that in a protracted recovery scenario, the total number of extremely poor people in the world would be above 1 billion by 2030. One of the lessons from COVID-19 is the interdependence. From the climate crisis and pandemics to rising inequalities and protracted conflict, these challenges cannot be dealt with in isolation. This brings me to my second message. Solutions we develop today need to be integrated to be sustainable. The same study that I quoted earlier found that integrated investments in governance, in social protection, in green recovery and digitalization could lift an additional 146 million people out of extreme poverty by 2030. So we all know that the green inclusive economy, or we all want to have it as ultimate destination. But for this, we need to put in place key building blocks. One, accelerate and align public and private finance with the SDGs and Paris Climate Agreement. The transition from a gray to green economy requires investments that are estimated at least $2.4 trillion a year through 2035 from both public and private sector. UNDP and OECD developed a framework on SDG compatible finance, which aims to increase transparency of financial flows. We have developed SDG impact standards to guide investments and SDG investor maps to identify opportunities. The second building block is accelerate the energy transition and tackle fossil fuel subsidies. We know that IRENA estimates that transforming energy systems based on renewables could boost global GDP by 98 trillion by 2050 and would create 63 million new jobs globally in renewable and energy efficiency. We are supporting in UNDP 100 countries on energy transition, together with IRENA, with UNEP, with Sustainable Energy for All. But what is essential here is to make sure that we have a just transition with leaving no one behind, by considering the impact of policies on different vulnerable households and workers, both in informal and the formal sector, and over time. Third, we need a paradigm shift in how we produce and consume the Earth's natural resources. We know that the current biodiversity crisis is a major barrier to sustainable development. We have lost 2/3 of the world's wildlife in just 50 years and degraded 60% of the world's natural assets. Most of the world GDP is dependent on nature and its services. So we do have a historic opportunity to reverse course and seize these sustainable dividends offered by nature, especially as countries head towards the 3 landmarks Rio Conventions next year: the Convention on Desertification, the Convention on Biodiversity, and the Climate Change Convention, together with the Ocean Conference and the Food System Summit. So we have solutions and we know the building blocks. However, what we see is my third message is that recovery trends remained mixed as countries face the choice of investing in short-term economic recovery versus long-term green economy. So to date, we see that G20 countries have committed some 428 billion to COVID recovery, but much of this capital is flowing in the wrong direction, propping up harmful industries with subsidies to outdated energy. We see a similar trend in non-OECD countries, which have the greatest opportunity to leapfrog into greener, sustainable future. Nevertheless, as we will hear today, with an increased number of governments pledging to a carbon neutral future by 2050, it will likely be the beginning of the end of an era of a world's economic model based on fossil fuels to power growth. But this will be a two-speed process. While advanced economies are already in a position to divert resources to a green recovery now, most developing countries will need first to create the fiscal space, to restructure debt, to expand off-grid electrification, to invest in solar or wind, to invest in sustainable food systems, and create the building blocks of a circular economy. Green New Deals are happening and can still happen around the globe, but their speed and policy instruments will be different. For oil exporting economies, for seeds, for biodiversity-rich countries, and the full range in between. So the context is important. Fortunately, there are several countries leading the way, which brings me to my fourth message. Integration of green policies with economic recovery is a clever long-term strategy. And we will hear today from Rwanda, from the EU Green New Deal, from South Korea in this regard. Now, on my fifth and last message is related on the UNDP's COVID-19 strategy beyond recovery, which reflects our role as the lead of the UN socioeconomic response to COVID. It is designed to help decision makers looking beyond recovery towards Agenda 2030 when making choices and manage complexity and uncertainty in governance, in social protection, in green economy and digital disruption. So for example, under our climate promise, we are currently supporting 115 countries to enhance their ambition in climate change adaptation and mitigation. Out of them, 60 countries are already linking their national determined contributions to green recovery, having as key entry points the green jobs and clean energy, followed by agriculture, forestry, and land use, the nature-based solutions. Through the PAGE initiative, UNDP is working with sister agencies supporting 20 countries on their COVID-19 response. And we would like to thank the government of Korea for the financial support for the partnership for the green economy. A new data future platform, which we are launching today, will support governments navigate their inclusive and green recovery policy choices and subsequent priority investments powered by renewable energies rather than by fossil fuels. In conclusion, we are really facing a historic inflection point as human activity has overstepped our planetary boundaries and at the same time left too many people behind, despite our pursuits for a more inclusive, prosperous future for all. The COVID-19 pandemic is a tipping point, and the choices leaders take now could take the world in very different directions. We have an opportunity to invest in a decade of action that not only helps people recover from COVID-19, but that resets the development path of people and planet towards a more fair, resilient, and green future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adriana, for your helpful reflections, 5 very useful messages, and giving us a global and realistic overview of the recovery trends, still ending us on an optimistic tone. So thank you for your remarks. Without further ado, we will now listen to how Rwanda has continued focusing on green recovery efforts despite the complex health and socioeconomic challenges of COVID-19. I'm pleased to invite Rwanda's Minister of Environment, Dr. Jean d'Arc Muzwa Maria, to share Rwanda's experience within this context.
Thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, friends of the environment. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure to join you for today's Build Back Better event on Green New Deal and to share lessons from our country, Rwanda. I would like, first of all, to thank the Republic of Korea and the United Nations Development Program for convening this event and promoting global knowledge sharing and cooperation. I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn from South Korea and the European Union, and of course, to share Rwanda's experience in responding to COVID-19 and why building back better and greener is a priority for my country, Rwanda. Despite managing the pandemic well and keeping case numbers low, Rwanda's economy has been severely impacted by the pandemic. The pandemic has affected many households, and it is likely this situation will remain until the economy returns to strong growth. In response, Rwanda has designed an economic recovery plan that details our priorities. The plan guides the safe resumption of activities during and after COVID-19. It is also includes short and medium-term measures to support vulnerable households, boost employment, stabilize living conditions, and position sectors for resilience and long-term growth, including creation of green jobs. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, despite the COVID-19 crisis, Rwanda is committed to multilateralism to address climate change and achieve the aspiration of the Paris Agreement and other key climate actions, including the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. This commitment was confirmed by the submission of our updated national determined contribution to the UNFCCC in May this year, 2020. As part of this climate action plan, we will reduce by 38% compared to businesses as usual by 2030 through improvements in energy production and use, better waste management, cleaner transport, more efficient agriculture, and nature science-based solutions. The pandemic has taught us, however, that we need to be greener than we first imagined. One very specific example is air pollution. While the country has relatively good air quality, our cities experience pollution due to transport and biomass burning. The recent COVID-19 lockdown in Rwanda made visible the link between human activities and air pollution as people stayed home and skies became clearer. The impact was particularly pronounced in capital city Kigali, where a reduction of air pollution of up to 20% was observed. Despite this temporary dip in emissions, air pollution is predicted to rise in coming years. To address this, Rwanda has taken the bold decision to end the use of biomass for cooking, starting with urban areas. We aim to reduce biomass use for cooking from 79% to 42% by 2024 by working with major biomass users and introducing incentives for cleaner alternatives. We are also greening our transport system and are promoting electrical vehicles and electrifying the motorbike taxi network, which employs more than 30,000 people in Kigali alone. A pilot to convert combustion engine motorbike taxis is now underway in partnership with a private operator. A number of electric cars are now being tried by Volkswagen Rwanda, and the Rwanda Green Fund has invested in a local company to introduce electrical motorcycles. In a sign of the country's commitment to green transport, all these are being done. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Rwanda understands that economic recovery cannot begin unless the health crisis is managed. That is why we are also working with partners to ensure an appropriate cold chain system is in place to effectively transport and store any COVID-19 vaccine. To this end, we have established the African Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain in partnership with the University of Rwanda, University of Birmingham, and UN Environment Programs United for Efficiency Initiative. Despite the government and our partners' efforts to build the resilience of our communities to economic, health, and climate shocks, we are still facing a number of challenges. There still exists a limited understanding of the opportunities that lie in building a green economy and the challenges in accessing climate finance. This is putting the brakes on large-scale private sector investment in green growth and the circular economy. We are also challenged by lack of access to the technology that would allow us to avoid outdated and highly polluting industries, energy generation, and transportation systems. Rwanda also remains highly vulnerable to climate hazards, which have tragically claimed lives and destroyed properties and crops. We are addressing these through a number of initiatives, including planting 25 million trees this year alone, and to address soil erosion and landslides in partnership with our partners, including UNDP Rwanda. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, green growth in Rwanda goes beyond economic recovery and forms part of all a long vision we have for our country. We welcome investors to do business in Rwanda and partners to join us on this journey. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to let you know that we are even introducing green scorecard for all planning in our public institution. The Ministry of Finance is now approving the green scorecard to approve any planning from any ministry, any public institution. So finally, I would like to invite everyone to visit Rwanda to learn more about the ways in which the country with meager finance capacity is responding to the pandemic and our broader environmental policy making process. By working together and sharing expertise and resources, the world can overcome the challenges we are facing, build back better, and create a world in which current and future generations can reach their full potential. After all, we don't have a planet B, so we have to have our plan for a green recovery and build back better. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Minister, for sharing your invaluable reflection on Rwanda's pandemic experience and the exciting opportunities that Rwanda offers. It was really helpful to listen to you. I would now like to invite UNDP Res Rep Maxwell Gomera to share his remarks with us on Rwanda's path to recovery and the role of UNDP. Maxwell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarwat, and I join you in congratulating my friend and Honorable Minister Jean-Jacques in an excellent articulation of the issues we are facing in Rwanda. Ambassador Yonshu and my friends and colleagues Sandrine, Adriana, and Sarwat, thank you very much for this invitation. It is a pleasure to join. We seek to jumpstart our economies. We need to enhance our capacity to create wealth without drawing down on nature and on our natural stocks. This is not a particularly new insight. In the run-up to the 2008 global financial crisis, banks took big risks, secure in the knowledge that because they were so large, governments would be forced to bail them out if they began to fail. Bankers, if you remember at the time, committed far more than their bank's own assets and capital, which ordinarily act as a reserve and safety net in cases of losses. They operated on the assumption that someone else would save them should the worst come to pass, as it did in 2008. Today, I'm afraid we treat nature in much the same fashion. We are drawing down resources without accounting for the economic and social impacts and assuming that someone else will save the day for us. But unlike policy responses to the global financial crisis, there is no equivalent bailout mechanism for ecological overshoot and collapse. There is no safety net for natural resources loss. We cannot reproduce the diversity of resources we are losing at the scale we are losing them. And without diversity of nature at scale, we lose the underpinning of all life on Earth, including our own as humans. Just to put things in a global perspective, between 1990 and 2014, average global wealth surged, supported by increases in human capital and and build capital, produced capital, roads, dams, all those things. However, over the same period, our natural capital stocks fell dramatically. In other words, while we saw impressive growth on human capital and built capital wealth, it came at the expense of nature. We were depleting our natural capital stocks and nature and investing them into human and built capital. Now, that approach and that trajectory is fine as long as nature is able to sustain such depletion. But we now know from the work of the IPBS, the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, as well as from experts like Johan Rockstrom, that we have reached the limits of what nature can sustain. And Adriana made the point very articulately. Whether those are stocks of water, forests, greenhouse gas emissions, we have exceeded the capacity of nature to sustain continued development along the pathway that we are on. Rwanda, the country I now call home and the country that I love, has understood the importance of achieving a balance between economic growth and the stewardship of nature. It is, Honorable Minister, such a remarkable African success story. During the same period that I was talking about, 2009 to 2014, Rwanda has been able to simultaneously grow its stocks of human capital, built capital, and natural capital. In other words, Rwanda is rapidly becoming a leader in green livelihoods on many fronts. I've been as curious as you might be around this panel on how Rwanda has achieved that. And for me, three things stand out. First, as the minister said, there's a new green transformation that's underway throughout Rwanda, whether it's transforming the energy economy, clean cooking stoves, new forms of energy, and all that, whether it's transforming the transport economy. The minister was referring to electric mobility, whether it's looking at climate smart agriculture. How do we increase productivity of agriculture that we have and the competitiveness of our agriculture? Whether it's diversified tourism and conservation, whether it's green infrastructure, these are all hallmarks of a deliberate transformation process based on a green ambition that I'm finding in Rwanda. Second, there's focused and clear policy at the top and permeating all levels of government and society about that transformation. Whether it's on the use of homegrown solutions and strong work ethics, or whether it's a clear vision on quality of life, smart cities, clear strategy for national structural transformation, shared values, and international positioning. All those ingredients are coming together in a nice cocktail within Rwanda that is helping to push the country forward. Finally, there are strong institutions that are supporting all of this. There's a very strong and accountable bureaucracy. One of the things that has been a pleasure for me and a pleasant surprise is how strong and accountable the bureaucracy is compared to other areas where I've had to work. There's strong focus on reducing inequality, on achieving gender equality, and on pro-poor growth. There's a strong focus on maintaining stability in an unstable neighborhood, if you like. All of these have come together to make Rwanda one of the leaders, if not the leader, on green transformation in Africa. But early this year, COVID-19 struck and changed everything. The economy contracted by 12.4%. All sectors of the economy, except ICT and health, have shrunk. That has reduced the fiscal space for governments to protect the SDG gains that we achieved over the last decade and created its own sets of policy challenges, including the following that I would like to leave with you as food for thought. How do we work together with the government of Rwanda to help it achieve the twin objectives of generating jobs and protecting the environment? Agriculture, as we know, is a great multiplier and employer, but it also can be a huge tax on environment. And in fact, it is one of the biggest impacts on biodiversity that we know of. So the temptation to create a lot of jobs through agriculture is quite high at the moment. But the issue has to be what kind of jobs and how do we make agriculture develop in a much more responsible way. The second issue is how do we ensure that nature and wildlife remain effective and legitimate land use options? Rwanda, like many countries in Africa, has staked its bets on developing its tourism and wildlife estate. Rwanda more so than any other country, and they've done a fabulous job on it. But we also know that the areas that are surrounding most of the protected areas in Africa, and also including in Rwanda, are also home to a lot of people who are in themselves struggling with their own livelihoods. If those people do not regard nature and wildlife as central to their own livelihood, we will be risking moving forward with nature and wildlife as legitimate and effective forms of land use options. We need to be able to work together with the government of Rwanda to create new forms of revenue around the resources that we have. Finally, how do we account for biodiversity risks and stop destruction of habitats? We have a measurement problem. Traditional measures of economic progress, such as GDP, have not been able to help us to take into account the footprints that we are having on our natural environment. We now need to think about other measures that can help us to move in a direction where our growth will not only be satisfactory across all social fronts, but also be sustainable on the environment on which our progress depends. Our colleagues in the United Nations Environment Programme have been working on a measure they call the Inclusive Wealth Metric. It is something that is worth looking at, and I think it is the future for all countries that will be looking into how to improve their sustainability. And I'm not suggesting here at all that we need to torpedo GDP. It's going to be with us for a long time. It is a very useful measure, but the time is right to start augmenting it. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a grand bargain to be made here. We have an opportunity to bring together wealthy, high-emitting economies and developing nations who are well positioned to capture carbon and in need of some major influxes of capital upon which to build their economic futures. In May of this year, Rwanda became the first African country to submit a tougher climate target to the UN, promising to cut emissions at least 38% by 2030, compared with the business as usual baseline. As time shortens to meet our climate objectives, the value of carbon mitigation is likely to increase significantly. The opportunities for countries to go beyond simply focusing on their own sustainable development and to build economic growth on the back of mitigation is becoming a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maxwell, for sharing UNDP Rwanda's experiences and highlighting its remarkable success story again. It's wonderful to know about all the work that's happening. Our next speaker is Ms. Sandrine Dixon-DeCleve, co-president of the Club of Rome. Before I invite Sandrine, I'm very mindful of the time, so I'd like to request the next two speakers in the panel, so please keep your remarks within 6 minutes. So Sandrine, can you please share with us your thoughts on the outstanding challenges, including political economy constraints for the EU, and any valuable lessons that can be shared from the European experience? The floor is yours.
Very much take to heart the last comment that was made by Maxwell Gamera. I think that your questions there, Maxwell, are spot on and exactly what we need to be looking at all levels. But let me go into a little bit what I see from a European perspective and tell you that my thinking comes from three key places. One is as the president of the Club of Rome, a 50-year institution that actually were the first to talk about the fact that we have limits to growth and that we must value nature and people as the core of our economy, not profit and profitability for certain individuals. And so I would say and contest, Maxwell, that actually we don't need GDP in the way it's formulated today. We absolutely need to move into a different type of human development index and a different type of growth mechanism. And I think that what's happened at the European level is clearly a test case for where that is coming from. I also chair an innovation and research task force for the European Commission. And the thinking there is, even in research and innovation, that we need to put people, planet, and prosperity at the same level across all of our aims for innovation and research. That we need to put people, planet, and prosperity, which is exactly what the president of the European Union just indicated in her State of the Union address, to start to look at shifting from wealth to well-being. What's interesting is that the Green New Deal, which actually should have probably been called a New Deal for Europeans and not the Green Deal, came out before the recovery issues. It came out before COVID. And what is happening now is that we are at a crossroads. So I'm not going to go into all the different aspects of the Green Deal itself, except to say that that crossroads demonstrates the difficulty in shifting from a policy mechanism of a system of different types of interrelated policies between agriculture, transport, energy, human development, economy, trade, finance, and how we bring all of that into a functional system that underpins the economy and allows us to move forward at a time when people's lives and livelihoods are at stake. And exactly as was indicated by Maxwell, the fact that many of our economies have contracted. And so the challenge for the European Union has been to tap into what we call that wake-up call of the future that we want, which is the economic reset. We see right now that those governments that are doing the best are the ones led by predominantly women, apologies, those men that are here, New Zealand, Scotland, Iceland, Finland, all of whom have put in place what we call well-being economies that have already taken the Green Deal indicators of people, planet, and prosperity and put them into their economies. They are coming out stronger from the recovery. We also see that it is those companies that have put in place environmental, social, and governance indicators and looked at their full value chain from an SDG perspective that are performing. And there are many reports now coming from the Sustainability Index and other funds indicating that this is where the performance is. So coming back to the Green Deal and the European Green Deal, we know that it is the right way forward. We also know that it responds to the activism that we've seen by the youth and many other movements in Europe who are saying that we are playing with the future. But the key problem right now is how do we translate it into practice? Just recently, we had huge pushback on the Common Agricultural Policy reform. And in fact, for the moment, are going back to business as usual rather than building back better. And I agree with some of the remarks that have been made. You cannot rebuild glaciers and you cannot rebuild some of the biodiversity loss. But we're not even going into a forward 21st century agricultural system. We're actually now pulling back into what we know. And that is what I think is the difference between an old economy like the European Union and a new potential economy like Rwanda, a country that has not yet been bogged down by strong incumbents who have their own decisions and ways of influencing policy. Many of the emerging economies can leapfrog much faster than the European economy. Many of the emerging economies also can tap into indigenous knowledge and the stewards of the land much better than old entrenched economies. And that is where the beauty of the knowledge exchange between all of us must come in. Now, I will conclude with a few thoughts. The European President of the European Commission has indicated very clearly that the European Green Deal is the North Star. And we know that already the policy formulation across Europe is moving in that direction. And that the budget mechanism is shifting in that direction. Although, again, it is those member states and those companies that want to hold on to business as usual that are blocking progress. Right now, in the European Parliament, where we have indicated that we will mainstream green across our recovery plans, there is huge pushback to go back to business as usual. So how can we solve this? And this is the reality check for all of us. One way to solve it is what's already been mentioned. We must demonstrate the potential for improving people's lives and livelihoods at a time when that is the greatest concern. We must demonstrate the fact that most people, actually, if you tap into their consciousness, are now ready to go back to what's most essential. Access to healthcare and placing a value on healthcare. Access to clean air, clean water, and clean food. And exactly as Maxwell indicated, placing a value on that. And then ensuring that the converging tipping points between climate, biodiversity loss, and health pandemics are immediately dealt with in a way to protect our people, planet, and prosperity together. So we have developed a compass, and I would like to propose this as part of my concluding remarks. The compass very much functions and has been presented to President von der Leyen as a way to implement the European Green Deal in a time of recovery. It maps and envisages exactly what is necessary in terms of debunking and bringing down the silos between different policy measures that actually are creating dysfunctionality, like continued subsidies for agricultural processes that are not actually respecting nature, or subsidies for fossil fuels rather than eliminating fossil fuels. It also looks at what do we want in terms of propping up those champions, those new champions of the 21st century. What are the new ecosystems in terms of economic activities that we need right now in this decade of action? And so we have delivered this compass, which, by the way, is now being thought through the entire European Commission to give them core principles of where to anchor their thinking, built on the SDGs, to then translate that into what are the market mechanisms, the economic mechanisms, the political mechanisms to ensure that they are embedded across each of those systems. What are then the interrelationships to enable the 21st century economy to develop with new economic activities and actors that are truly champions of a green economy, of a low carbon economy, and a human-centric economy that puts people, planet, and prosperity first. I can send to all of you a link to this compass approach. It very much speaks to the core of Maxwell's very important point around the need to decouple from natural resource use. And that is where it brings Europe and Africa and Asia together. Because together we must understand the full value chain of natural resources. We must absolutely decouple our impact on the taking from many other countries and the impact that that has on their lives and livelihoods. So it brings us back to the European Green Deal, making Europe not only a leader in Europe, but also a leader globally in ensuring green practices across the globe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandrine, for your valuable and practical reflections on this topic. Since we are really running short of time, I'd like to invite Dr. Tae-Young Jung, Professor of Sustainable Development at Yonsei University. As governments around the world try to respond to COVID-19 and begin to formulate and implement major economic recoveries, Korea's example is useful. I'd like to invite Professor Jung to provide us with this greater insight into Korea's Green New Deal and the existing challenges into its implementation. Professor Jung, the floor is yours, and please 6 minutes.
Thank you. Well, but can you share the slide that I prepared? I think it's helpful, and I do my best to be quick. And
sure.
Well, thank you. And at the beginning, my old friend Ambassador Yu has already sketched out the Korean the Green New Deal process. I think the carbon neutrality. Our president, months ago, he declared that Korea also joined the carbon neutrality, zero emission, net zero in 2050. So I'm not gonna repeat the same thing, but since I'm in the academia, I just share my own observation on the Korean Green New Deal and our net zero the program. Those kind of ambitious transformation of Korean economy is still under developing. So my observation is very much limited, but I'm sure that what I'm gonna do today is kind of direction that our country should focus on while moving forward. Well, next slide. Well, I think I don't have to repeat this global trend because previous speakers, they also mentioned that. But according to the IEA, the very recent report on the world energy outlook, basically fossil fuel trend is going down and the renewable is increasing globally. And another important point is uncertainty in recovering global economy, but it may take time to recover our energy demand, whatever it is, the fossil fuel or the renewable energy. I think based on this new projection from IEA, let me just focus on what Korea has done. Next slide, please. Well, this is a very the abstract the sketch of Korean New Deal, and we have one part, the Digital New Deal, which is relevant to prosperity. I mean, SDGs and Sustainable Development Goal, one pillar is economic development. So Korea is quite strong in digital, IT, and so on. So our government, we're going to boost up again our economy by promoting this digital component. The second part that I'm going to highlight today is the Green New Deal part. Okay, we're going to harmonize with our environment. By doing so, also we're gonna create a new job and the typical argument of New Deal, but we're gonna put the green component here. And finally, I think this is one interesting component of Korean New Deal program, strengthening the safety net program. Many of the panelists already mentioned, but this is the inclusiveness of our the Korean New Deal program. We're not going to forget about our people. The people-centered argument can be implemented in this safety net argument, inclusiveness of our program. Next slide. Well, we have 10 the specific programs under Digital New Deal category or Green New Deal category, or this safety net thing. For example, obviously, Korea is very keen on green transformation. especially not like other country. Korea is a really packed country. Our urbanization is more than 80%. So how are we gonna make our living area, urban area, green? It's gonna be really big challenge for us. So for this Green New Deal program, we put especially urban transformation. And next slide. And as usual, this is a government plan. So obviously they have plan program say, look, we're gonna put X amount of money, and obviously we're gonna create the job roughly, the 2 million. Sorry, this is a 2 million jobs. So that's a government plan for next 5 years. And next. Yeah, so I think this money part, basically government want to start from the public money, but the key of our plan is whether we're going to really engage our private sector, industries and financing institute who may think, oh, okay, this is a great opportunity. Let me invest my money to this green program. That's, I think, from the financing point of view, that's success and failure factors. Government money, public money is not enough. Whether a government plan can be a good incentive or private sector consider it as an opportunity so that they can jump in. I think that's a really big factor. Okay, the next slide. Well, I think funding part, let me skip. Yeah, I think the UNDP Seoul Center, I hope you can share my slide, then I can, I can skip this one. Next slide. Yeah, again, next slide. Yeah, I think this is a money things that I mentioned. And the key is the private financial institute, they're gonna put their money to public program or not, that's the key. Okay, next slide. Okay, my own observation, I think the Korean current Green New Deal program, even if it looks quite comprehensive, for me, the one in academia, I think it's very much shonen weighted. I think still our program is not lacking, but it's a little bit unbalanced with our long-term plan, which is a green transformation. So that's my quick observation. And second, next slide. Well, again, I think it's too much public driven. I think we have to really engage more private sectors who has a much larger capacity in terms of money, in terms of human capacity, in terms of technology development. The key is how to engage the private sector. I think that's really big challenge for Korea to implement this wonderful plan. And second, a little bit unclear to me, the long-term vision. Even if a Korean president just announced that, okay, we're gonna join to this net zero, the 2050, but it's a long journey. It's a long way to go. So I think we have to start really making the practical implementation plan. I think that's a big challenge. And second, I think some other speakers also mentioned that the linkage with SDGs. I think we have 17 specific SDG goals. I think not only just our commitment to a plan to UNFCCC or LEDS and something. I think we have to think about this linkage with the SDGs. Next. And I think climate adaptation is somewhat missing. I think it's a different the interpretation, but when I see while I'm attending this seminar, I see some questions from some comment from participants. And one of the wonderful the comment, I should echo that the one comment is about the natural-based solution. What is the natural-based solution? Green Deal program. My interpretation is I think we have to think about a little bit more on climate adaptation related plan. whatever you call it, yeah, nature-based or the climate resilient or green resilient. But I think we should really highlight the climate adaptation, which may be more urgent and necessary for every country when we talk about the green transformation, especially for the developing country. I think this the nature-based solution or climate adaptation plan should be highlighted. And investment and financing thing I highlighted. And next slide. I think that's my last the slide. And thank you for your attention, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Jung. I'm sorry we had to rush you, but thank you for this excellent presentation. Let us quickly move on to the Q&A session. And I'm glad Professor Jung already started the Q&A session in terms of addressing the nature-based solution question. If I may request Adriana to address this question as well.
I think that that was reflected in several presentations. But I think for me, one that is a real multiplier is the ecosystem restoration. And we are entering the UN Decade of Restoration next year. And I think that land restoration will offer multiple development benefits. We'll look at the governance of land, at land titling, at land rights, which are absolutely critical. We'll have benefits in carbon storage and sequestration. We'll have benefits in terms of water security, in terms of food security, which is critical. We'll have particular benefits on reducing conflict. And on security, and of course on jobs and livelihoods. For me, ecosystem restoration, land restoration is critical to address the current nature crisis, the current climate crisis, and the economic recovery. So if you look at the sustainable development benefits of this, it's and also the mandate that we have for the next decade, I think that one is the most critical one. Of course, I think in terms of other transformations that we need to enable this to happen will be the pure transformation of the financial system, the strengthening of the governance and the rule of law, global consumption and production patterns, and all the everything related to the enabling environment to allow the nature-based solutions to kick in. I think we have lots of economic analysis related to forestry, lots of economic analysis in terms of reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, and what does it mean in terms of social protection, in terms of livelihood benefits. Solutions we have, we just need that new enabling environment through the transformation of the financial systems to allow us to implement them.
Thank you, Adriana. Thank you for giving this comprehensive reply within the short time. We have so many good questions. I wish we had more time to go through them, but I just selected one question, and I would request the remaining panelists to address this question from your perspective. Let me quickly read out the question. So the undertaking, such as the Green New Deal, will require substantial changes in many sectors, from reforming education to adjusting taxation. We know that the plans can be met with considerable skepticism across the government. What are the arguments that can be used to convince the skeptics? So I'd like to request the minister or Maxwell to address this one from a Rwandan perspective, please, and then Sandrine as well. And please take 1 to 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I understand that people may think that there may be skepticism between the policymakers. But when, for example, in Rwanda, the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Environment have established a green scorecard for each institution to follow while planning. There can't be skepticism. You cannot implement any project without respecting and passing through that green scorecard. So everything is resolved on the level of the Ministry of Finance, which is in charge of planning, and the Ministry of Environment. All the other sectors will follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Did you want to add something?
Maybe Max?
Well, thank you, Minister. I think you've said it. You've said most of it. I would say, Sarawat, the transformation is already underway. Yeah, and I do agree that we have a big political economy problem here, and try to bring everybody on board. But as Sandrine said previously, people can see that it makes sense to invest in nature and natural resources. Yeah. But if we are to give it a lot more oxygen, I would suggest just 3 things to focus on. First, we must put it in the context of work, because everybody's thinking about how do we create jobs. And yes, nothing like environment for creating a new form of decent jobs. Second, we must look at it as an opportunity for creating wealth. How do we start putting new forms of revenues into people who need it? How do we start creating new forms of wealth for developing countries and other countries? And finally, we must look at it as an issue of health. You know, COVID-19 has just reminded us how important nature is, how important investing in reducing pollution or any other forms of disease-causing things is to our world today. So investing in reducing pollution is not just good health, it's good economics as well.
Thank you, Maxwell. Sandrine, could you comment?
Absolutely. I just want to absolutely compliment the last 2 remarks, because I completely agree, and also with what Adriana has indicated. Maybe just a couple of thoughts. We were able to get 80 countries to sign up to the largest pledge ever around a planetary emergency with the UNDP and the UNEP and others, with a pledge to focus on people and nature. And I think that truly governments are understanding now the importance of valuing nature. Okay, so that's one thought. But how do we then translate into bringing more people on the journey? And exactly to your question, really leveraging more private sector involvement and citizen involvement. The key is exactly what the ambassador said. First, we have to anchor it in legislation. We have to put it in a place where there's no going back. And that's where it's complex and difficult. And that's where we're starting to get pushback in Europe, and I'm sure in other countries, because it's getting difficult. And the incumbents and the power sectors don't like it. But we have no choice. The second is we do need to bring people. Citizens need to understand that this is good for them. That means using more democratic processes of citizen assemblies, and using the understanding of COVID as well. And this is something that I know will be controversial. We can lock down when we need to. We can direct when we need to, even in democracies. And it may be messy, but we can do it. This is the first time that we have had the greatest human experiment around what it is to be more innovative and what it is to actually hunker down and rethink how our systems are functioning. We need to use that as governments as well, because crisis after crisis will continue to come upon us as the warming continues to happen. So designing a system now rather than designing through chaos is part of what we need to communicate. And that's very important, even if it's not always easy.
Thank you, Sandrine, for very useful remarks, exactly the truth that you highlighted right now. And I think we need to move on to the closing session, but if any of the panelists had any kind of something that they really wanted to say in response to what we just discussed, could, just take 1 minute and let me know if anyone wants to speak.
Well, thank you. Well, my final remark is, our topic is about the transformation. Yeah, the green or digital transformation requires out of box. I think we are too much used to the current practice. What I mean is we are dealing with some kind of global public good like COVID-19, climate change, and in some sense partially education. Well, then our perception, our practice is already, okay, that's none of my business. That's government job. That's a UNDP job. That's the international agency's job. No, I think we have to transform our system. Not only just the government, maybe government, may lead it or initiate it, but the success and failure is not really from the government wonderful fancy nice program. I think it's the participation from the bottom. I think so. That means the private sector who has much larger, bigger capacity. So I think one of the question from the participant is, what about how are we going to make the private sector jump in this program? Well, we have to flip down our decision-making trees. Maybe we have to allow more the rooms for private sector rather than, look, this is our guideline, this is the public money, so that you jump in. I think we have to change our practice from our current practice. I think that's the first step to transform our system to more greener or more smarter or toward the digital system. So that's my final suggestion and remark. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jung. So if it's okay with all the panel members, let us move to the closing. Yes, just to what you just alluded to, we have got some really interesting questions, and I want to thank the very engaging participants for raising these questions. We have taken note of your questions, and we will be passing them on along with your contact details to the speakers, and we will share relevant resources in our website. Let me also highlight that this webinar has been recorded and will be made available to all participants. And we really want to thank you for joining us today. I think in our last count, we had 63 people joining from 4 continents. And when we are talking about webinar fatigue, it's really exciting to see that so many people at different odd hours of the day have joined us and have participated actively. And my thanks to all the speakers for your active participation and the audience for your really active engagement. I would now like to invite our director, Stefan Klingebiel, once again to give his closing remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sabat. Don't expect a long speech, less than 1 minute. So first of all, this was really amazing, very inspiring discussion. And thank you to all contributions. That was great. And it's really a pity that we couldn't go more to the details and, addressing so many things. So that was great. Just 3 takeaways, and this is nothing new, just based on what you are saying. In a way, our discussion is not new. Limits of growth is not a new concept, but we have more momentum. And this kind of let's raise the level of ambition, also what Ban Ki-moon was saying, I think this is something what is positive. The second point, how to make it happen. And I think this is really the most important aspect. And we had a number of examples how to make it happen in a way, tangible way. Ban Ki-moon mentioned education. I think education as a way to let people know that well-being of people is crucial. I think this is very, very important. What the minister, Jandak, was explaining to us, green scorecard, and of biomass for cooking. I think this is really very hands-on and very important. My third point, that would be also about how to make it happen rather from a conceptual perspective, this kind of political economy dimension. I really love this discussion about well-being economies, how to demonstrate to people that improving well-being is crucial. I think this is something what is really important. I mean, in times of, let's say, populism, there might be also some risk attached. But this is really something what I take away from our discussion today. At the same time, we probably need to think more about what Professor Jung was saying about short and long-term trade-offs. And this is also, let's say, different actors with different interests, how they are acting. I think this is another dimension we probably would need to follow up. So with this, let me just say that we will reflect how to what we can do as a center, as a follow-up step. But I found it extremely interesting, and I found it really good to have this kind of knowledge exchange exercise. So thank you so much with this. Have a great day in United States. Have a great afternoon in Europe and Africa, and good night in East Asia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, thank you so much for everybody. Yep.
Stay
Thank you,
safe,
Minister.
stay healthy.
Thank you,
이대사님
everyone.
수고하셨습니다.
Very much.